So we got another live match today. I've had a day off work, so I've dropped in on the open at Redhill fishery in South Wales, in Monmouth. It's a beautiful fishery, absolutely ram-packed full of fish. And as it's warming up now, just coming out to sort of winter, I'm hoping that the fish will start feeding and moving around and we'll catch a few fish today. The wind's a bit tricky again, it's quite cold and it is sort of picking up and gusting, so hopefully I'll have a good draw out of the wind and we'll have a nice day. Let's see what happens. So here we are at the peg. Peg 17 on mollies. It's quite a decent draw, to be honest. I fancy 20, so we're not a million miles away from that. So hopefully we'll catch a few fish. Wind's off my shoulder, so hopefully a bit of presenter bait. Wish me luck. So here we are at the peg. Peg 17 on mollies. It's quite a decent draw, to be honest. I fancy 20, so we're not a million miles away from that. So hopefully we'll catch a few fish. Wind's off my shoulder, so hopefully a bit of presenter bait. Wish me luck. So I started the match at 11 metres, feeding little balls of micro pellets and a 4mm pro expander on the hook. It didn't take me long to get bites. Sort of after about 5 or 6 minutes, I was into sort of small silverfish like roach and an odd small skimmer. But the F1s we were after were taking a bit sort of more time to sort of get into the swim. Now after about 20 minutes, I did hook an F1 and I thought at this stage that it could start getting better. But it didn't really happen. And anyone who knows Redhill and knows Molly's Lake in particular, there's a shallow bar that runs like from peg 18 to sort of peg 12 or 13. And this shallow bar, it's not till you go to sort of past 11 metres, sort of 13, 14 and a half and 16 metres, that you get any sort of depth. At 11 metres it was sort of like 2.5 to 3 foot. And at 13 metres it was going down to sort of 3.5, 4 foot. And then at 14 and a half it was down to sort of 5 foot. So it was getting deeper the further you went out. And I did hook another F1. So I had 2 F1s, I did foul hook another. But it was just not quick enough. I was watching people opposite that were fishing in deeper water. And they were getting bites a lot more regular than me. And they were catching fish a lot more regular than me. So I knew sort of the writing was on the wall and that these sort of fish didn't want to come into the shallow water. And with the wind swirling around and the wind due to drop sort of later in the match, I sort of made a decision after 40 minutes that I had to sort of get out there, fish a bit longer, sort of take a chance and try and put a few fish in the net, because I just didn't feel like I was going to catch any amount of fish at this 11 metre line. And on top of this ledge, I just didn't feel like it was going to happen. So we went out to 13 metres and I fished my 13 metre line off to the right slightly, just because the wind was coming from the right, so it was a little bit sheltered and a little bit easier to sort of present my rig. I did sort of plumb up another line to my left in the same sort of depth of water, and my plan was to sort of fish one until it sort of died, then move to my left, fish that one, and just keep nicking back and forth the 2 swims and keep fish ticking over. So when I went on this sort of line to my right, I fed micros and expanders again, and it was pretty instant. Within sort of 5 or 6 minutes, I was into an F1. But it was also apparent that there was a lot less sort of silverfish, a lot less sort of roach and small skimmers, like giving me nuisance bites and things like that. So there was obviously a lot more sort of F1s and carp in the area, which were keeping those sort of nuisance fish at bay. So, like I said, went on this line, sort of 5 or 6 minutes, had a little indication, lifted the rig out, lowered it back in, banged under, and I've had an F1. Now, I was hoping that this line would sort of really kick off now, because I could see people on the opposite bank. They were catching quite well, sort of in deeper water. And if I was going to stand any chance of sort of keeping up in this match, I needed to have sort of a good run on these lines. After a lovely little run on my sort of right hand side, fishing micros and expanders, it started to tail off a little bit. So I've changed it up, and I've started feeding hard sort of 4mm pellets and rattling them from a bit of a height to try and make a bit of noise, to try and drag sort of fish into the swim. And this worked for a sort of little bit, but the swim was dying on me, and it wasn't seem to sort of get any better. It did bring a little bit of a response, and I caught like 1 or 2 sort of quick fish, but it was never sort of coming back the way it was. So I knew that it was time sort of to maybe start a new line and seeing if I could sort of carry on that sort of nice little run that I had when I first went onto this line. But I think when I go onto that new line, I think I'm going to start tapping in sort of hard 4mm pellets instead of micros, just because I think it sort of makes a bit more noise and sort of drags a few more fish in. And I think that's going to be important sort of in this match, is dragging fish into your swim, because they don't seem to want to feed. So I think it's going to be a case of making a bit of noise, dragging them into your swim and sort of forcing them to feed. So we'll have a go on the other line and see what happens. So we started the left hand line now. I didn't start this the same as I did my right hand line. Instead of sort of feeding micros and fishing expander on the hook, I started tapping 4mm pellets and tried to sort of make a bit of noise, like I said, because this did give me a good response on the other line. So I started feeding sort of 6 to 8 4mm pellets, fishing a 4mm expander on the hook as well. And it took me like sort of 2 feeds to get an indication, but not shortly after that indication, I was into a fish, and it was an F1. So straight away, I thought, right, this is going to be good, this is. And I plugged away on this sort of 30-metre line to my left, on those 4mm, thinking it was just going to get better and better. And it did, for a spell, get really good. But as the same thing that happened with the other line, you could feel that it was sort of tailing away again. You know, these fish were sort of getting to the stage where you could catch them, but it was sort of going away from me again. And I kept thinking to myself, well, if this gets to the point where it's starting to die and I'm waiting long times for bites, I'm going to have to sort of go between the 2 swims and hopefully nick an odd fish from each swim. But the wind was dying a little bit again. It was starting to sort of tail off. It wasn't so gusty, it wasn't so strong, and I was hoping that if I could just catch a couple more fish on this line, then I can add a section on and get out to that deeper water a little bit further again, and maybe that would be the difference, and I'd have another sort of good run. But It was all to do with the wind. It was all to do with if that wind died. Now, it was showing signs of sort of getting weaker and sort of not sort of being as strong and not sort of gusting and swirling around as much. But it was whether it would stay like it long enough for me to be able to get another section on and go that extra bit. But like I said, I kept plugging away, kept nicking an odd fish, and at this stage we were sort of getting close to sort of the 3 hour mark, and I was really sort of falling behind. You mean there was probably 4 or 5 people on the lake that were all beating me, and I needed that run of fish. I needed that sort of run of fish from somewhere, and the only place I could think of that was going to give me a good sort of run of fish would be starting a new line on that longer line, like adding a section on, going to 14.5 metres, starting the line again, and really sort of pushing the swim, because we're getting to the sort of halfway point of the match, towards the business end, and we need to be catching at this stage. And I think that was the only way I was going to really compete. So the wind dropped, we managed to get another section on, get out to 14.5 metres, get out in that sort of 5 foot of water. But I made a little change as well. Because I was feeding 4 mils, I decided to put a hard 4 mil on the hook as well. Because we was out a little bit further, fishing in 5 foot of water. I was getting a few sort of indications and missing a few bites. And at this stage, I didn't want to be sort of striking the sort of expanders off, having to ship back, put a new expander on, go back out. I wanted to be a bit more efficient and a bit more sort of quicker in my fishing. So I put a hard 4 mil pellet in a band and fished that, tapping in hard 4s. If I missed a bite, I could just lower it straight back down the hole and get back into another fish. So this worked really well. I was getting regular bites. I was catching really quick. I was really starting to motor, and I kept thinking to myself, well, you know, this could be the difference in this match. If I could just keep going like this could be the difference. And with that wind dropping, I thought, you know, I could fish this nice and tidy. I could catch for the rest of the match, and maybe sort of catch up with those front runners on the lake, and really sort of do a bit of damage. It was lovely fishing. Fish a 9 hollow. And every fish was just lifting to ship back. You know, it was just so nice to fish and get bites and get indications and be able to work at it because you get indications. It's nothing worse than not getting indications and not getting fish in your swim, and then trying to work at things where you just don't know what's happening. It's easier when you've got fish in your swim. So I was catching quite well at this stage. I was really sort of motoring, catching regular, good sized fish, sort of £1 to £2 fish, and it was going really well at this stage. And I was really thinking that I could actually sort of sneak in here, and if I kept going, I guess, and someone else sort of slowed down, I could really sort of bump my way up and maybe get into the money somehow. So this 14 metre line have been really, really good. You know, I've had a really good run on it, fishing those hard pellets, tapping hard fours in as well, and I was getting lots of sort of indications of dragging lots of fish into the swim, and it was getting sort of really efficient, and I was catching up with the people, the front runners on the lake, sort of opposite me on the dam wall. I was really starting to catch them up, and I was thinking, well, you know, if they have a bad spell this last sort of hour and a half, perhaps I could sort of really turn the screw and sort of catch them up. But as happened with the sort of 13 metre swims, the 14 metre swim done exactly the same. You had a really sort of good run and a really good spell, and you felt like it was going to be really good till the end of the match. And it just sort of slowly got worse, and slowly sort of started tailing away. And no matter what you did, sort of changing your feeding patterns, you know, putting less bait in, more bait in, it never really sort of sparked it back into life. It was just like, you felt like it was starting to sort of die on you. And I knew that I sort of needed somewhere else to go. We were sort of coming up towards the last hour of the match, last hour and 15 minutes of the match. And I knew that I needed to prime somewhere to go and catch a few quick fish, exactly the same as I have been throughout the match. Every time you started a new line, you sort of had a quick run of fish. So I needed somewhere to go, and needed to sort of force the peg a little bit and force the issue. So my ideas was I was going to start sort of pinging 4mm pellets, quite heavy, on those 13 metre lines that I was catching on earlier, and hoping that I'll drag a few fish, and the noise will drag a few fish into the area. And because I'm not fishing it, there'd be sort of more fish coming into that area, and that was my plan. So I dropped it on this pinging line on my right hand sort of 13 metre line, and to be honest with you, it was absolutely brilliant. I dropped in, the float's buried straight away, and I was into fish. So this sort of pinging pellets and making this noise has really dragged sort of fish into the swim, and really like sparked these swims back to life. So I was hoping this last sort of hour and 15 minutes, I could have a really good run on these lines now. I carried on sort of loose feeding pellets on both lines, both 30 metre lines, hoping it'd be really, really good. So this pinging pellets was making a massive difference. It was really dragging fish into the swim, and to be honest with you, it was really sort of sparking the swim into life. But what I was doing was, I was at a pot on, I was still sort of tapping pellets in to sort of pinpoint fish into an area, and then when I hooked that fish, then I was loose feeding over the top to drag them back in. And I found this was sort of getting me bites a lot quicker than sort of fishing in the middle and pinging over the top. So by sort of tapping in sort of 6 to 8 pellets and pinpointing the area, pinpointing those fish into that area, that was making a massive difference and really sort of speeding my sort of catch rate up, because I was getting bites a lot quicker, so I was catching fish a lot quicker, and I was really working really well. So the match was sort of real, getting down to the business end of this match now. And this was the sort of time when I had to put as many fish in the net as I could. The feeding of the swim that you're not fishing, and then when you drop on it, it was just so quick to get 1 or 2 bites. It was unreal. And then you had to make the right decisions at the right time to switch lines. You didn't want to waste any time, because you knew that that line you've been feeding with the catapult, after sort of 1, 2, maybe 3 fish, you knew that you had to change, but you didn't want to sort of leave it too long. You had to make that sort of decision to change lines really, really quick to try and maximise the amount of fish that you're actually catching. And because sort of we're getting to the sort of last couple of minutes of the match, I knew that there wasn't a lot of time left, and every fish was going to count, and every fish was going to make a difference. I've had £78 4 ounces. I believe that's second in the match, so it's a nice day to be fair. It started off quite bad with the wind, and you know, halfway through it's been lovely. The wind's dropped and I've been able to fish nice and tidy, nice and light rigs, and it's been a really enjoyable day. I've caught F1s and small carp all day, so I did have a few blank spells but not too many. It's been a really enjoyable day. It's been nice to get out and catch a few fish, to be honest. So second in the match, happy days. If you like these sort of live matches, then like and subscribe my channel, and I'll be doing a lot more of these in the future.